Welcome to the Knowles Development Podcast, an exploration in leadership development. I'm your host, Brad Knowles. Now let's dive in. Welcome to the Knowles Development Podcast, an exploration of leadership. And we're so glad to welcome back Woody Ritchey as our guest for the second part of a two-part series on winning and failure as it pertains to leadership. Woody, welcome back.
Great to be with you, Brad. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we had a great conversation about the importance of winning for an organization and how that can really just, kind of buoy the people within our organization, help them with their personal, professional development. Even had a conversation around how we can use that to attract more talent to a team. So we're shifting gears here. We're going to talk about kind of the darker side of it, but it's a part that every team goes through. It's a part that every leader has to go through. And that's when you come up short, when you fail. And I think there's a lot of conversation for us to have on failure and how to kind of glean lessons, from that to make the team better, to improve as a leader. But I'd love to just hear your initial thoughts on, failure as a leader and maybe how that's helped shape you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because we all want to celebrate success, right? But everyone runs away from failure. And I have always used in my professional coaching life that failure teaches us more than success does. Yeah, it really does. It causes you to refocus, start to pay attention to the fundamentals again, to go do the things that may have made you successful in the past, but we got sloppy. And that's an aspect from leadership, is reminding people of that as we go forward. Used to have a phraseology in the organization of, we will all make mistakes and we will all fail, including myself. And I make as many mistakes as anybody as we go forward. Yeah,
that's easy.
I make it look like an art.
That's right.
But we don't want to drive the bus off the cliff, was the follow-on buzz line with that, which is, let's not do something that is fatal to the organization. Right. Let's not do something that's fatal to our individual careers, because there's the aspect of organizational success and individual success, but there's also organizational failure, and which really can start to germinate from individual failure. And so it's one other aspect of this is as you coach, you're always assessing skills, capabilities, chemistry, all those things that organizations bring to an all that individuals, bring to an organization.
Yeah.
Well, if this is a person, so if Woody has made a mistake or has failed for some reason, but we see this is a teachable moment and a learning moment for Woody, let's use that in a caring and candid way to give feedback and then let the rest of the organization know that we always care about our people, right? This isn't wow, you screwed up, you're out of here. It's like, Glengarry Glen Ross, the movie, hey, you're fair. You don't get this watch unless you do that.
Right.
We don't want an organization that looks like a slave galley. We want people to understand that we're always on a journey of growth and learning. Sometimes we fail, sometimes we fall, but we don't want to be fatal to the individual and hopefully not to the organization. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of Susan Scott, who's the author of Fierce Conversations. She has this thing called the decision tree, which I love helping teams with. And it basically says, okay, well, if it's a leaf on the decision tree, it's something I just want you to do. I don't want you to report back to me. So Woody, that's just something you do. And you're just, it's a daily thing or a weekly thing, and you're just on it. And then a limb decision within the organization is, Woody, I want you to make that decision. I want you to act on it, but then I want you to report back. But then there are these trunk decisions. And the trunk decision is, I still want you to make the decision, Wood, but before you take action, let's have a conversation. Yeah, let's have a conversation. And then there's root decisions where I'm going to want you involved in the conversation, but we are going to decide what direction we're going in because it's so critical to the organization. And we can sustain so much failure in the leaf and limb land, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the notes that I took, and I hope people listening took, is that failure is a better teacher, right? It's a better teacher than winning. You're going to learn more from those failures, and that becomes so critical, you know? I know there's a dynamic that I always kind of lean on, which is I love the praise in public, correct in private, right? How did that work? Talk to me about that dynamic for you and your organizations. How would you dance that?
Well, so I always have to differentiate a little bit, because, you could have, failures versus insubordination kind of things. And we're not going down that path. We're not going down the,
no, they did everything behavior. Right. They just didn't succeed.
Yeah. And there's also the being attuned as a leader to that pulse of the organization let's say it was a, leaf or limb decision. Right.
Yeah.
And we failed. And as we were doing our review, we saw what went sideways. I would never make it a point to say, and oh, Brad, I want to talk to you later today. And everyone knew in the conference room at the leadership meeting, yes, he's going to get his clock cleaned when he's in there. No, quite the inverse. I would individually approach or send a quick note and say, can we just talk about, what went on, and get the, and the aspect of this that's important for me is it's a bit of a cathartic thing for the employee, for the associate. They get to sit and, so tell me what happened. What do you think went wrong? Where did it come off the rails? What do you think failed? Right. They get a chance to self-teach or to self-assess, because many times we know why things didn't work out the way they want. We don't want it to be a dictatorial, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this. Because then they get like Charlie Brown. All they hear is wah, 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 right?
Exactly.
What we want them to do is to own it. So it's back to our accountability, responsibility aspects of the job. We want them to own it and then say, okay, now then when you heard it from their lips, you get to reflect it on them and go, so what are we going to do different next time? What would you change if you're going to change something here? Because sometimes it's omission. I didn't do this. I didn't follow up with that client, or I didn't get timely, whatever the thing is. I didn't process the paperwork in the right manner. But that then said is, well, help them to self-assess and self-correct. Right. If you have self-correcting organizations, then that next time something happens, maybe even that associate helps the other associate. Doesn't have to be a leader. That's the beauty of leadership at all levels. When everyone really understands the expectations of an organization, and that you can do, I used to tell organizations because I was a turnaround guy, private equity and venture guys, there's very little you can do that's going to, drive us off the cliff. Right. My job is to make sure we stay on the rails and we get using all these transportation, as the plane's crashing.
If we take the bus over to the train station, then we're gonna
we
take 6 less metaphors, please.
Yeah. But then that associate can understands. Well, let me go help Woody. I saw what happened. A senior associate who's very experienced would go and help another, one of our employees. And so you kind of get that, self-correcting organization when you handle it that way versus public shaming.
Right. You know what, there's something I want to point out, that there's almost a tenderness in your voice in reflecting on having those conversations. And it's fertile ground, right? If it's going to be a teacher, by definition, it's fertile ground, but we have to be tender with it, and if we're going to encourage it in an organization, we have to make sure that the person walking out of that meeting realizes it's okay. It's okay that we didn't succeed today. That's okay. And what did we learn? How are we going to do better? How are we going to go about it different? How do we make sure we don't have to relearn this mistake or this omission or right? Like I'm excited about new mistakes, right? I get a little tired of the old mistakes, right? But I think that's an important piece of just how are you as a leader emotionally approaching that conversation, because it's not the laundry list and the browbeating. It's much more of a, hey, how are you? What happened there? Talk to me about it.
It's interesting. And, as I grew in, having done so many turnarounds as a CEO over the years, most of the job is addressing problems.
Well, yeah.
It's not, it's like, because you're walking into an organization that's already been on the decline or on the fail route. Right. And so now it's, how do I get everything pulled up? How do I get everybody up with the correct attitude that, not a, gee, it's everything's against us. No, we can all pull in this together, but you get a chance to, and you have to exemplify that. I like that word, tenderness. I've never had anybody use that word about me before, but thank you very much. But there's also a sternness, but not being so brusque that people don't want to approach you. But that said, you're setting the ground right away. You're setting the groundwork right away that says, all right, we're going to learn from our mistakes. How do we go do it? Right. And I think that's as important, or maybe more important than celebrations, to be fair. Right. It really is.
Yeah. One of the organizations I'm involved in talks a lot about failing faster. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great sentiment, but it puts a lot of pressure and a lot of onus on the leader in terms of appropriately handling the failure when it happens. Right? Correct. Failing faster doesn't work if every time somebody fails, you're coming out with the battle axe and lopping heads off like that. Yeah. That can't be the approach then, right? So talk to me a little bit more then about this care and candor conversation, because that's a thing I think most leaders I find, Wood, are great at one.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're really good at one of them, and it's the combo that really is the magic sauce, right?
Yeah.
Where did you find you needed to develop personally as a leader? Was it more on the candor side, or was it more on the care side?
I think it was more on the candor side. Because the caring can over the emotional caring side. I don't want to be looked at as being vindictive or any of those things. So that took me a lot of work to get. Now that's back to the, you establish a framework with your organization that we can give feedback mutually. Right. Hey, Woody, can I give you some feedback on this?
Hey, buddy.
Yeah. And so once you set a certain comfortableness around that isn't abused, because you can say, no, not right now. I'm not in the frame of mind. Mm-hmm. I watched a football game yesterday where a guy made a really bonehead penalty, and it was for the Buccaneers that Brady's playing for now, and it extended the game, the plays for the other team. And one of the other players tried to pull him and say, hey, and you saw his reaction, which was, I don't want to talk right now. Right. I don't give, it's too emotional.
I'm not ready to learn the lesson. Right.
Yeah. And this was from a guy. The other guy is a chronic, penalty guy I've watched, But anyway, so we have to learn that aspect of it. And I've had to do that in my personal life as much as anything, as you're a parent or in a, not spousal, but, as you're working in organizations. Volunteers are the hardest people to give candid feedback to. Well, I'm just a volunteer here. I don't, I'm trying my best. It's all, I understand, but we can't do this. We can't, we have to, and so I had to work the hardest on that.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing for those that are listening. I would challenge you, decide right now, which of those is a strength that comes to you perhaps a little more naturally, and which one requires a little bit more work, a little bit more effort, and put a little plan in place. How are you going to get better at? I realized for me, it was similar. It was a candor piece. I didn't realize the depth of candor that I could go to. And I remember it like clear as day. Two of my favorite people standing on the stage. It was an event for Keller Williams Realty. They were standing on stage, and it was for a room of like 500 people. But because it was a breakout session near the end of the whole thing, everybody's off goofing now, right? So there's like 40 people in the room. So it's super intimate in this big cavernous space. And the words they used around candor literally unlocked a door for me and said, oh, I didn't realize I could talk to people that way. Like, that's thoughts that I have in my head. I didn't know I was allowed to say them. Yeah. And that it was because I cared about them that I would say them that way. Again, it's not a malicious, it's not a hateful, it's not a hurtful, but it's a very direct, right? It's absolutely talking about the issue at hand unabashedly, without flinching. And to me, I think that balancing act between care and candor shows up in this failure conversation a lot.
Yeah, it does. And if what as we're having the discussion around the failure, I have the most impactful one that I ever had. If you're, I'll share it if you're interested. It was Please, yes. When I was running the Americas for Motorola in their cellular infrastructure division. Yeah. Pretty big gig, right?
That's a big gig.
One of my
cellular is not going to make it though.
No,
right?
it's going to.
Yeah, that's not going to last. That's a fad. Yeah.
We had an installation going in, and I won't get into the specifics of the customer and things, but I get a call from the executive VP, and he goes, Wood, I need you in a meeting with this customer that I really didn't even know that well, right? So we go in the room, and I'm sitting next to the vice president of the customer. And we're having a conversation, and we're learning that the implementation of a new cellular network is going abysmally. Ooh. It's just crashing it. Now we're talking $1 billion implementation that's going sideways really quick. And so the customer, who I only ever had met once before, the VP, I'd met one of the, maybe at a customer event. Mm-hmm. Leans over to me and goes, we're going to pull the account from Motorola unless you take it over. And I'm like, what? You personally take it over, not one of your minions. Well, then I go, and I looked across the table at Jack, the executive VP, and I go, well, that's not my call. That's his call. Mm-hmm. He can't, and so Jack said, well, that's what we're going to do. The customer, and we have a more conversation, obviously. The customer's leaving. Jack goes, holy, gets into the expletives. He was a former Marine, by the way. He was that guy.
It was colorful. It was colorful.
Yes, very colorful. And he goes, well, you have to have a conversation with David about this. And I go, what? And he goes, yeah, you got to sit him down. You got to talk to him. I want to fire him. I want to do all this. And I'm sitting there going, well, first of all, he's not a bad guy. He's actually pretty capable, but he's just not helping to lead this. So caring and candid, that next morning, this was an evening meeting. Next morning, I have David over into the office, and we have the conversation very candidly. This is going south so fast. We're going to lose $1 billion account here. $1 billion.
Right. Yeah.
We can't do
people.
This. Yeah. Yeah. Now, had the conversation, didn't throw the guy under the bus. The executive VP later came back to me and said, Jack came back and said, Wood, I'm glad you didn't fire Dave. Well, because, he, in the heat of the moment, when you're faced with all that disappointment and you have shareholder meetings like in 2 weeks and those things hit the press, you're going to be eviscerated.
Right.
Well, now the other aspect of this for me was now I have to rebuild a team that's doing this implementation on a multi-state. And, this is like, 1,200 people doing these jobs that are engineers and all this stuff. Now I have to pull together a team, and I'm losing players right and left because they're watching it go sideways. They're all even, and we have to kind of take that approach of, this is Braveheart kind of thing, right? We have to do this. Right. We can't afford this to go sideways. I need your help.
Right.
We need to, and you know what it became? It was interesting. They certainly understood the urgency. They're smart people, right? It created an opportunity to attract good people because they saw this. Wow, we have to do this.
Right.
We got the best engineers in the company coming over, and I was like, how hard this is going to be. And we turned that. Wasn't me. We turned that around, in probably a 3 or 4 month period against those folks did Herculean work.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And then I got moved off to somewhere else, but I didn't get
and then they fired me. Yeah.
And then they moved me to Singapore. And
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, in that failure, there was the chance to help another, employee find a different path. He's still with the company, but still with the company.
Wow.
And then to use that failure as come on, guys, we can do this. And so it was, that one's vivid in my memory. I can remember it like it was yesterday. The guy's leaning over and goes, "We'll keep the account with Motorola if you take it over personally." I'm like, "What? I met you once. I met you.
That's right.
How do I? Did you know I'm not that?
What did I say in that meeting? Right?
Yeah. What did I?
Yeah. Make sure I never say that again. Right?
Yeah.
I love it.
So I think failure brings forth opportunities all the time. That could have been a one, by the way, to drive the bus off the cliff.
Yeah.
That one would have been
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've definitely experienced similar, not on that scale, but the power of the beginning stages of failure that, when addressed, when acknowledged, not shying away from it, can have a real power to rally the team. Right? When you acknowledge the fact that we have a problem and everyone has to contribute to be able to get to the solution. I know I've been able to look back with teams that I've worked with in the past, and conversations years later have been, "Man, do you remember that?"
Yeah.
When we have those reminiscent moments and that connection, that heart connection moment, it's never around a win. It's always around the failure that we somehow pulled out, and kept from crashing, and I think that's a piece that leaders really need to understand, that if you try to sweep under the rug something like that, or you try to have, pick a fall guy, it was all his fault, and, let's kick that guy out of the organization kind of a thing, like you're missing this incredible opportunity for synergy with the team.
Yeah. And, as you said, a couple of things there. I used to always think about it. I'd get brought in by a private equity firm to turn a company around and replace a CEO. Right.
Right.
And so the first meetings wasn't, we're going to throw Woody. It was a goof. That guy didn't know what he was doing, blah, blah, blah. No, it was never that. It was, here's where we're going and why. Here's what I expect of you. Here's what you should expect of me. Never drive it in the rearview mirror about mistakes that he or they made. Right. It's like, here's where we're going and here's what we have to do to get there. And so, and that's hard slogging, but you got to move fast. That's the other aspect that you're fail fast.
Yeah.
Letting something fester that leader, over time we learn these things as leaders, and we watch situations and we're going, it doesn't feel right. It's not going, I hope it works out. Hope is not a method. It doesn't, and so we have to move quickly on those so that they don't become catastrophic. When I think back to that implementation going south, there probably were, viewpoints all along the way that we didn't see, or we weren't being, but darn it, we would have stopped it a long time ago. So moving, there is a certain, we still talk about it. All my friends we've moved on to a million different things. Yeah. Remember when that thing went side? Oh yeah. And it was like, oh my heavens. It's like, you can feel the sweat already coming on your brow going, oh my God. But
it's that, camaraderie in the trench kind of a thing. Yeah. And it really can create some of the strongest bonds. You know what I mean?
It does. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Wood, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been great. This conversation about winning, this conversation about failure, and how all of it is so impactful on our leadership journey. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brad. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.